Hey everybody, it's Betsy Lafferty, and tonight we are going to be going over my case study. This happened at St. Regis School. It is a small, rural K-8 building. Just like many small districts, they're low on funds and rely on fundraisers. Mr. Keith Sample is their principal. He is a third-year guy, and he is not from the area, so he has been working very hard to get out in the community and build positive relationships and buy-in for St. Regis. They've been working with the PTA to raise money to purchase computers for a new computer lab, and Mrs. Lynn, who is a library specialist, doubles as the computer teacher. She, along with Mr. Sample, worked with the teachers to find out the best types of software, and after that was done, it was purchased, and the teachers have been really utilizing the computer lab and its resources. The teachers wanted to expand the software to be used in their classrooms, so Mrs. Lynn decided that she would make copies and give that to them to use in their classrooms. All the teachers were pretty happy about this except Mrs. Brandon. Mrs. Brandon was a newer teacher, and she had experience in her old district with this and knew that it was violating copyright law. She took her concerns to Mrs. Lynn, and they were not really well received. Mrs. Lynn thought she was doing what was right. Mr. Sample also confronted Mrs. Lynn about this, and she really thought she was doing what was right, and more importantly, utilizing funds in a way that was going to help the school and the students. There are some legal implications due to this. Mrs. Lynn did break the Copyright Act of 1976 when the software was reproduced. When they purchased a license for the library, that constituted as a contractual agreement. When the reproduction of the software occurred, it was a breach in this contract. Not really one person was harmed when this was done, but it does leave the school open to be found liable and maybe to have some penalties because of this. Just to sum it up in one sentence, the reproduction of purchased software for classroom use, although seemingly done out of the desire to help the school, is illegal and puts St. Regis in non-compliance with the Copyright Act. Now let's just look at some of the facts. Who are the people involved? The stakeholders are Mr. Roger Sample, who is the principal, Mrs. Lynn, who is the library specialist and computer lab monitor, Mrs. Brandon, who is the third-year teacher, who previously taught another school, and then also the St. Regis PTA. It took place at St. Regis, who is rural and is 25 minutes away from the next biggest town. There are 2 teachers per grade level. There are also 2 teachers for special education, one for grades K4 and one 5-8. 9 through 12 are bused to the larger city, and it is a public school. Let's just review some of the things that happened. Violating copyright could cause repercussions for the school, and maybe they could face penalties. While there could be monetary damages, more than likely just destroying the reproduced software what would be happening. The principal, teacher, and PTA members are all the major stakeholders in this situation, and the PTA also needs to be contacted because they might not really understand some of the policies and laws that schools have to follow in order to be compliant. I think in order to get a better understanding of what actually happened, there are a few questions that I would like to have answered to understand better. First, did Mr. Sample provide any training on copyright to his teachers? I also would like to know if Mrs. Lynn on purpose violated copyright, or did she really just think she was doing what was best for kids and teachers by copying the software? And I'm curious if there was any chain of command policies that could have been followed. And then also, is the PTA aware of the rules regarding copyright? I think if I have the above questions answered, I would have enough information to sit down and make a decision. However, I really think that in a situation like this, you can't just necessarily look at the first analysis in order to make your decision. You really need to sit down and speak with everyone involved to analyze exactly what happened. Some options that I think could happen and some consequences that could take place. First of all, do you want to make no decision at all? I really think this would not be a good idea. It could lead to future instances of laws or policies being broken and could also lead to damages for your school. Maybe a more comprehensive plan would to be train all members of your staff, have a discussion with Mrs. Lynn and possibly suspending her computer lab duties, and then also suspending the violated software from use. Maybe a more liberal approach would just to be sweep it under the rug and hope that nobody finds out. Some intermediate strategies that could be a good idea would be meet with the PTA to discuss policies and laws that schools have to follow. Training for just the media specialist so she could have facts and more knowledge on copyright law. Also dispose of any of the copied software and use it only in the computer lab, and maybe look at additional policies that address decision-making chain of command. All right, so let's evaluate these options and see what we've got. First off was taking no action. I really think this would be a terrible idea. While no one might honestly find out that this happened, we know that it's the wrong thing, and we have to set the example and do the right thing. If we don't deal with the issue, there also could be continued conflict between Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon, which is not going to help our school team. And then future software issues could happen because we ignored this breach of the copyright law. Next, training of all staff members, suspension of Mrs. Lynn in the computer lab, and also suspend violated software from use. I think you have to look at what resources, time and money, what would it take to train all the teachers, and also is this knowledge really going to be applicable to them and really be used? Would there be anyone else to take over the computer lab if Mrs. Lynn was suspended? In small schools, usually there's not a whole lot of staff, and so there might not be anybody to do that. And then also, would discontinuing the software even help anyone, especially the students? Sweeping it under the rug, terrible option. Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon's relationship could continue to deteriorate. There could be resentment among staff members if the problem is ignored. And Mrs. Lynn also might feel like she can make more decisions like this in the future. Another option, meet with the PTA to discuss policies and laws they have to follow. I think this is a really great idea. I think we have to think about, will the PTA and school relations improve if everyone is on the same page? And also, if they understand, can they be more aware and know the importance of following laws, even though it would save the school money doing the right thing. Next, training for library, the media specialist, so she can be educated. I think if we just trained the media specialist, it would require fewer resources, and she would be able to make decisions that fit with her responsibilities, and also base those decisions on facts and not just opinions. And then a next option could be disposing of the copied software and only using it in the computer lab. I think this is a much better idea than maybe suspending all software use. This still allows students and teachers to utilize the software, but the school would no longer be violating copyright, and it also helps show teachers that policies must be enforced and chain of command followed. Lastly, reviewing policies that address this decision-making chain of command. I think anytime you can review old policies, it's a good thing. It can freshen them up or solidify that you have great policies in place. It would also give teachers a clear-cut path when making decisions. They might be less afraid to make decisions if there's a certain way they have to do that. And staff can feel more like a team. They're all on the same page, following the same set of rules. When choosing the best option, I think you really have to reflect on all aspects of the situation. Informed decisions happen when you can take out your emotions and also relationships and really think out the best solution that is good not just for one person, but really is going to help everyone as a team. Choosing the best option. So after reviewing and looking at the different consequences or options that we have, I think I have a multi-prong approach that is going to be good for everyone. First, I'd want a conference with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon to help reduce any hard feelings associated with the incident and get us all back on the same page. I'd want to schedule a meeting with the PTA to explain why software cannot be copied, even if it means saving money. I believe this copied software would have to be destroyed and then only used in the computer lab as intended. And then I would get additional training for Mrs. Lynn, who is the media specialist, on issues dealing with copyright. My final reflection. I really think that Mrs. Lynn copied the software to save the school money. She was a longtime employee and is really invested in the students and staff at St. Regis. Other teachers and PTA members also supported it because they saw her helping the school and just trying to use funds wisely. Mrs. Brandon was also correct to bring her concerns to Mrs. Lynn and to Mr. Sample. She had a different perspective and she didn't want her school to get into trouble. I believe that conferences need to be held with the teachers and also PTA so everyone can be on the same page. When everyone knows the facts and there's no information, people can come together and understand why decisions were made. Also, I really think just communication is going to be key in this scenario. Facts need to be presented. Staff and PTA members need to understand why the software reproduction has to be destroyed, and everyone just needs to know that the students and the school are the most important thing. So, implementing the plan. The first thing I would do would be meeting with the teachers involved and also the PTA. I'd want to do this individually first to get everyone's side of the story, and so really no blame would be placed or people would feel like I'm singling them out. Next, I would meet with Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon together. I think they need to understand that they were both trying to do what they thought was best and help the school, and even though that's really good, that certain situations need to be taken care of, and that really just to get them back on the same page so they can be a great team. And then after meeting with all the stakeholders, I would have to have the software destroyed. It would be a good show of faith that we just can't allow copyright violations to take place, and doing what's right is always important. And then lastly, I would schedule additional training for Mrs. Lynn so that it would be specific to her area of expertise. It would allow her then to make future decisions based upon fact instead of simply her opinions. I think things to consider when implementing this. Staff and PTA need to know that even though the reproduced software was destroyed, that I'm very appreciative that they're looking out for options to save money at school. I think Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon need to know that even though their opinions on the issue differ, they are both coming from a place of trying to have St. Regis be its best. And if they know that they're working on shared goals, then they're going to be stronger. I want to know that staff knows that I value their thoughts and their opinions and their judgments. But that being said, if there are big issues that take place, that my door's always open to have a chat about what's best for the students and also to make sure we're following policies. And then I just want to really make sure that I'm giving my staff tools to make better decisions in the future if any other situations arise. My final thoughts, you really need to be diligent and checking in on teachers and then following through with school policies when decisions are made. Consistency is key. You have to be consistent in all situations. You don't have to be the same, but consistent is important. And then lastly, you just have to show everyone respect. Working through disagreements or poor decisions can be a really hard place to be in. And you cannot single people out. And just it can really lead to feelings of anger or resentment. So it's my job to find solutions to help correct issues, but still find ways to be supportive and help my teachers grow as a staff and as a team.